Good afternoon.
Very good one.
Well, today's national accounts confirm that Australia's economic recovery is underway. The Australian economy is coming back. Facing a once-in-a-century pandemic that has caused the greatest economic shock since the Great Depression, Australia has performed better on the health and on the economic fronts than nearly any other country in the world. Today, there is not a single person across the country on a ventilator or in ICU due to COVID. 80% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero at the start of the pandemic are now back at work. And Australia's AAA credit rating has been reaffirmed, with Australia one of only 9 nations in the world to have a AAA credit rating from the 3 leading credit rating agencies. In the September quarter, real GDP increased by 3.3%, beating market expectations. This is the largest quarterly increase since 1976. Today's increase in the September quarter of 3.3% is the largest quarterly increase in GDP since 1976. It follows a 7% fall in the June quarter. Technically, Australia's recession may be over, but Australia's economic recovery is not. There is a lot of ground to make up, and many Australian households and many Australian businesses are doing it tough, very tough. Victoria, a quarter of the national economy, has only just begun its recovery after the devastating second wave. In these national accounts, every state and territory saw strong growth in the quarter except for Victoria, where it contracted. If Victoria had grown in line with the rest of the nation, national growth in the September quarter would have been 5%, not 3.3%. From the very beginning of this crisis, the goal of the Morrison government has been to keep Australians in work and to help those Australians out of work get a job. And this is what is happening. Over the last 5 months, 650,000 jobs have been created. The effective unemployment rate has come down from a peak of 14.9% to 7.4%. The participation rate is at 65.8%, approaching its pre-crisis level. And the Reserve Bank has said that the JobKeeper program has saved at least 700,000 jobs. In October, with the recovery gaining momentum, there were 2 million fewer workers and 450,000 fewer businesses on JobKeeper in the month of October compared to September. We're also seeing encouraging signs in other key economic indicators, with consumer confidence up in 12 out of the last 13 weeks, business confidence back to its pre-COVID levels, and the housing market strengthening. The economic recovery is being strongly supported by the federal government's $257 billion of economic support, with $130 billion already flowing into the pockets of households and businesses. JobKeeper, Job Seeker, the cash flow boost, two $750 payments to millions of pensioners and others on income support has helped cushion the blow and help build a bridge to the other side of this crisis. Today's September quarter results were driven by a 7.9% increase in household consumption, the largest increase on record. Consumption was up in 14 of the 17 categories, with the largest increases being in transport, hotels, cafes and restaurants. New public final demand increased by 1.7% to be 6.1% higher through the year. Dwelling investment was up by 0.6%, following 8 consecutive quarterly falls. It was largely driven by alterations and additions, which rose by 5.1%. The outlook for the housing market is positive, supported by programs like Home Builder and the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. Business investment fell by 4.1%, with mining investment down by 5.2% and non-mining investment down by 3.7%. However, the latest ABS CapEx survey, taken after our October the 6th budget, where we announced significant investment incentives, did show a significant 5.8 percentage point upgrade in non-mining business investment plans for 2020-21. Exports decreased by 3.2% in the quarter to be 14.9% lower through the year. Services exports, including tourism and education, continue to be particularly affected as international borders remain closed. Imports rose strongly at 6.5%, consistent with the increase in household consumption. Overall, net exports detracted 1.9 percentage points off GDP growth in the quarter. The terms of trade was up 0.7%, with nominal GDP up 3.7% in the September quarter. Turning to income, compensation of employees, which is the measure of the National Wages Bill, increased by 2.3% in the quarter off the back of strong jobs growth to be 1.5% higher through the year. The rebound in employment, together with social assistance benefits, which are 48.3% higher through the year, have contributed to an increase in household disposable income of 3.4% in the September quarter and an increase of 8.1% through the year. The household savings ratio remains elevated at 18.9% in the September quarter, and that followed a record high of 22.1% in the June quarter. Strong household balance sheets, reflected in income growth and the elevated savings ratio, will provide ongoing support for the economic recovery into the new year as confidence continues to build. Today's national accounts can give Australians cause for optimism and hope. And as the Governor of the Reserve Bank said this morning, we have now turned the corner and a recovery is underway. That being said, many challenges do remain. The global economic environment remains uncertain as many nations experience an increase in COVID-19 cases and new lockdowns. This has seen the OECD warn overnight that a number of European countries could experience negative growth in the December quarter. But the OECD at the same time have upgraded their outlook for Australia. The road ahead will be long, hard and bumpy. But the Australian economy has demonstrated its remarkable resilience, and Australia is as well positioned as any other nation on earth. Today's national accounts represent a major step forward in Australia's economic recovery. Thank you. just going to now turn to some slides and then we'll take some questions. The first slide obviously shows real GDP growth. And as I said, 3.3% up for the September quarter, down 3.8% for the year. This is an important slide because this goes to what is occurring across the different states. And it's looking at both private and public expenditure. As you can see, New South Wales and Queensland have led the pack with 6.8%. South Australia, 6.7%. Northern Territory, Tasmania, WA, the ACT and Victoria being the only state that contracted over the September quarter. Next slide. The next slide shows the contributions to real GDP growth. This is very much a household consumption story today. As the restrictions are being eased, Australian families are getting out there and starting to spend again. We saw a massive drop in household consumption in the last quarter and now it's picked up. The other important factor here is net exports detracted 1.9% from GDP in the quarter. Next slide. Again, 7.9% up in the quarter after a fall of 12.5% in the last quarter with household consumption. Next slide. As you can see, it's a story of the restrictions being eased and Australians being able to get about and do what they do best. Travel around, go out to cafes and restaurants, visit their GP, incur other health expenses, a bit more shopping. It's a very positive story, 14 out of the 17 categories. The next slide goes to business investment. Now, as you know, this was a real focus for us in the budget, and we have significantly boosted the investment incentives with the immediate expensing. But as I said, you've seen business investment down 4.1% for the quarter, but particularly a big fall in the mining investment at 5.2% and a fall in the new non-mining investment of 3.7%. Compensation of employees is the wages bill for the nation, and again it is up by 2.3% in the quarter, and this reflects the strong jobs growth that we have seen. Next slide. Household gross disposable income, money in people's pockets and families, and again a increase of 3.4%. In the last quarter it was 2.2%, and so we've seen back-to-back quarters of strong growth in disposable income. And as I said, that's a reflection of jobs, but it's also a reflection of the increased social assistance benefits. Next slide. The savings ratio. At times of uncertainty, people save more. We saw it during the GFC, and we've even seen it in a more pronounced level during this crisis. 22.1% last quarter, 18.9% in this quarter. But importantly, as the restrictions are being eased, as confidence is coming back, Australians are going to continue to spend. And that money on their balance sheet that we saw both in the disposable income slide, but also in terms of the savings ratio, means that there is money there to be spent in the coming months. This is a comparison of what has happened to the economy year on year. And as you can see, Australia at 3.8% has outperformed nearly every other major economy. Our performance has been better than the European nations, France and Germany, and also the United Kingdom. It's been better than Japan, Canada, and New Zealand, and it obviously reflects the success that we're also having now on the health front as well, with the momentum really picking up. Are there any questions?
You said you think consumers will continue to spend.
Yep.
Do you think they're going to continue to spend enough to see the growth rate we've seen today repeat itself in the December quarter and onwards?
Well, again, I'm not going to to make a prediction about what happens in the next quarter, other than to say that the trend is our friend here. And what we are seeing is improvements on a range of economic indicators. Today's national account numbers is not an isolated event. It's the accumulation of significant government support. It's a reflection of the virus being suppressed across the nation. And you're seeing business confidence, consumer confidence coming back. Matthew, what we've seen in recent days is other positive economic data. We saw capital city house prices up 0.7%, and we even saw stronger growth in regional house prices. We've seen building approvals up 3.8% yesterday and up 14% through the year. We've seen strong job growth, 178,000 jobs coming back over the last month and 650,000 jobs over the last 5 months, and 80% of those who either lost their job or saw their working hours go down to zero. Since the start of the pandemic, 80% of those are now back at work. So the economic indicators are positive. That being said, this is a very challenging time and there's a lot of ground to make up. The economy is smaller today than it was pre-COVID. And it's the expectation in the budget that that will occur until the end of next year. And so what we're really focused on is getting people back into work. That's our number one focus. And the growth numbers today means more jobs. Growth means jobs, and jobs are our focus.
Treasurer, you talked about technical definitions, but are you saying today the recession is over? And what impact does that have on people's real lives?
Well, technically, the recession is over, but the recovery is not. And what we know, Mark, is that a lot of Australian families watching your news tonight will have been in a pretty tough financial situation. And a number of Australians are still out of work. But what we do know is that the Morrison government is doing everything possible to help those Australians get into a job. And the fact that Victoria now has the virus under control and it's 25% of the economy, the fact that these numbers were taken before the budget, and in the budget there was $98 billion of new spending on various support measures. Those measures will roll out over the course of the next 12, 18, 24 months. JobMaker, hiring credit, the tax cuts, the two $250 payments that are going to pensioners. All of this means that the federal government's support will continue to be there as we build that bridge to the other side of the crisis.
Treasurer,
Shane and Lane.
You've got APRA like this week pointed
Sorry?
out. APRA this week pointed out savings in banks are up 200 billion over the past year, and you've got that exceptionally high household savings ratio.
Yeah.
Does that mean you should be thinking about the policy settings for the budget in terms of encouraging people to expend, and does that mean that you actually have to, you should be rethinking whether giving more money to people at a time when you're running a 200 billion deficit is actually the right policy mix?
Well, firstly, we're not out of this crisis yet. There is a long way to go. And as you know, Shane, this is predominantly a health crisis. And so the economic recovery, both its speed and its trajectory, is very much dependent on success on the health front. And we just don't know what's around the corner. Obviously, the vaccine trials are going well, and that is looking promising. That being said, there are parts of the economy and sectors of the economy, whether it's because the international borders are closed or because of other health-related restrictions, are still doing it tough. And so our economic support needs to be there. When it comes to the economy-wide supports like JobKeeper, they are tapering down, and that's consistent with our response. It's always been temporary, it's always been targeted. It's always been using existing systems, and it's been scalable, but it's tapering down, consistent with the restrictions being eased. But then we've started to engage in some more targeted supports, like what you've seen the last few days on Home Builder, being extended for another 3 months, changing the price caps, allowing the first sod to be turned in 6 months, not 3 months, so we can build that pipeline in the construction sector, which supports so many working Australians. And then also the announcement yesterday about travel agents. Again, $128 million to support people in the travel agency sector, small businesses who, because of the restrictions on our international borders, have come upon pretty hard times, and this is designed again to build that bridge to the other side. So we'll look for targeted support where it's appropriate, but as for our macro supports, like JobKeeper, they are tapering down.
Treasurer,
Lani.
given mining investment fell 5.2%, will you consider any additional measures to stimulate investment in that sector and keep the resources sector strong?
Well, again, the measures in the budget, Lani, are very much designed to boost investment. They'll cover around $200 billion worth of investment, and as you know, they're focused on immediate expensing, an expanded instant asset write-off. If you've got a turnover of up to $5 billion, you can write off that expenditure in year one. So those measures, which we announced in the budget, are not reflected in the September quarter, and we're very hopeful that that will help encourage more investment in the mining sector and, of course, in the non-mining sector.
Treasurer, Phil Lowe was saying today that we can expect 2 years of high unemployment and low wages growth, and that this was predicated on there being a vaccine not until the end of 2021, and that international borders would be closed largely or restricted until then. What do you say to people in those sectors like tourism who are facing a very nervy year or two?
Sure.
Should they be looking for other opportunities, or are you going to be there to support them all the way through this?
Well, as I said, in the tourism industry, we announced yesterday the support for travel agents, but there's also been a lot of other structural supports that we have announced in the budget and ahead of the budget for whether it's the aviation sector, whether it's for the tourism sector. We've been there to support them. We'll continue to provide support as necessary. Domestic tourism will be a beneficiary of the international borders being closed. Of course, we want those international borders to open, and as you referred to, a lot will depend on that vaccine. But domestic tourism, and we welcome the announcements by the state premiers in recent days, will pick up. Absolutely will pick up. I mean, I saw today Rex Airlines saying they're putting on a lot more flights, Virgin, a lot more flights. There's going to be strong competition for that domestic tourism dollar, and we are very hopeful about a vaccine. As you know, we had scenarios in the budget, but until that vaccine is found, I think it's going to be pretty difficult on the international front.
To encourage people to spend domestically?
Well, again, there are some responsibilities of the federal government and there are others of the state government. I've welcomed what the state governments have done in relation to vouchers. As you know, they've done a set of vouchers in New South Wales, they've done it in Western Australia, they've done it in Tasmania. I've spoken to my counterparts at the KIFA, the Council on Federal Financial Relations, about options for them to make those investments, and I welcome any more that they do.
Treasurer,
Yeah.
Treasurer, I had a question around the budget. Obviously, the economy's growing quite strongly. The JobKeeper seems to be tapering more quickly than you may have anticipated. Does this mean that you're hopeful that the budget outcome is tracking better than you expected, even only a month or 2 months?
Well, again, those numbers will be updated in my EFO, but of course, we had made specific allocations in the expectation of a certain number of people being on JobKeeper in the December quarter. We were expecting 2.24 million people being on JobKeeper, and obviously today it's just over 1.5 million now. That may pick up in the coming weeks, but it's still a long way to go to get to that original forecast. The recovery today, in terms of September quarter, is even better than we expected at budget, better than what the market has expected. You heard that from the Governor today, that the numbers that they're seeing are better. Now, take the unemployment rate. We had thought it was going to reach double-digit numbers by the end of this year. We were talking and thinking 10%. Then we brought down our assumptions to around 8%. I'll update those numbers in my EFO over the course of this, which will be announced over the course of this month. But certainly the improvement in the labour market is better than expected, and it does reflect the success on the health front.
Treasurer,
Michelle, sorry.
Despite that improvement in the labour market, very many people are going to go into Christmas uncertain about when they can get a job.
Yep.
Will you be clarifying before Christmas, say at IFO, what the long-term job seeker level will be, or will they have to wait until next year for that clarification?
Well, again, we've announced a temporary extension of that job seeker coronavirus supplement. That is our position. The best thing we can do, Michelle, for Australians who are out of work is to help create an environment where they can get a job. And all along, we've been talking about a private sector-led recovery. That was a very clear characteristic of the budget that I delivered on October the 6th. Government is not the solution. Government can be a catalyst for the solution, and the solution lies in the private sector taking those decisions to hire new people, to innovate, to grow, to expand. That's why we put in place the job maker hiring credit, because it was all designed to make that difference between an employer saying, no, I'm not going to take on that younger worker who's been unemployed because I just probably can't afford him on my payroll or her on my payroll. But now with the job maker hiring credit, you can tip the balance in favour of taking that decision. So too with the immediate expensing. As you know, when you purchase new machinery for your business, you depreciate it over a number of years. If it's a harvester, it might be over 6 years. We're now saying go out and buy a harvester today and you can write it off in year one.
Nevertheless, we're going to have higher unemployment for a longer time. The Governor has confirmed that again today.
Well, and again, I think, Michelle, you make a very important point because you underline the significance of the economic shock that Australia has faced. This is a once-in-a-century pandemic, and this is the greatest economic shock since the Great Depression, and it dwarfs anything that was seen here in Australia or abroad during the GFC. I mean, that number is very clear. During the GFC, the global economy contracted by 0.1%, and according to the IMF, the global economy will contract this year by 4.4%. So we have faced a massive shock, and what's also different about this crisis is it's been both on the supply and the demand side. Normally you'd see a recession being as a result of a reduction in demand. But because of the health crisis meant that people can't go out. So their spending on restaurants, hotels, cafes, tourism services collapsed. And we saw that in the June quarter. And so it's what we've seen today, particularly through the consumption story of 7.9% boost in consumption, is as a result of those restrictions being eased, people are getting about their normal lives. Yeah.
Could you just expand on Shane's question in relation to the household savings ratio?
Yep.
Obviously, we've had success in defeating the coronavirus, or at least
Yep.
suppressing it, and then you're saying that there's still a bit of uncertainty.
Sure.
What's your message to households who have those high savings ratios? Would you like to see them being prudent and maintaining a buffer, or would you like to see them out there spending?
Well, there's decisions as to what Australian families spend on and how they spend it and when they spend it are matters for them. But my message to the Australian community today is that Australia's economy is coming back. The economic recovery is well underway. There is real cause for optimism and hope. Australia is better placed than nearly any other country in the world to make this comeback from COVID-19, and that should give them confidence to go out and conduct their normal lives.
We've got near record levels of private saving.
Yes.
And we're trying to encourage spending. Is this the right time to increase compulsory super?
Well, again, as you know, there was a significant report that was conducted by 3 eminent Australians, led by Mike Callaghan, and that report has been released publicly, and there'll be many commentators who will have views on it. What it did say is that our retirement system is sound, it's sensible, sustainable, and it's effective. And what it also said, though, was that there was a trade-off between wages and between compulsory super. And that is not a new comment, but it looked at the evidence, including international evidence, and made that conclusion. Now, we've heard that from the Reserve Bank, and we've also heard it from the Grattan Institute, among others. What I have said publicly previously is what I'll say again today. which is it's legislated to increase, as you know, to 10% next year. Before that legislated increase takes effect, the government will make an announcement about its decision.
Treasurer, I think as you pointed out in the budget, the unemployment forecast was peak at 8%.
Yep.
Dr. Lowe said today he now expects the RBA forecast to be trimmed down to in the sevens, somewhere between 7 and 8%. So presumably when you do the update to my EFO, we're going to have an unemployment forecast of below 8% from the government, somewhere in the sevens.
Well, again, John, I'll wait till my EFO for those numbers to be revealed. But what these numbers today show, and what the October ABS jobs numbers showed, and what payroll data just yesterday showed, is that the labour market is strengthening, and it's quickly strengthening, and it's strengthening faster than we thought. And any adjustments to those forecasts will be made in my EFO. I do point out that even with JobKeeper coming off next year, the budget forecast was for unemployment to be trending down. As you know, 7.25 by June of next year, then 6.5 after that, and 6. And as you know, I laid out a fiscal strategy which was in two parts. The second part, where we were aiming to get our unemployment rate comfortably below 6%. Remembering that in February of this year, pre-COVID, unemployment was 5.1. When we came to government, it was 5.7. It came down to 5.1. We're really doing everything possible to get that unemployment rate down. Chris?
How much does China threatening our exports threaten the recovery? And have you had Treasury have a look at that?
Well, Treasury continually assess the economic situation, both domestically and globally. But Chris, this is a very serious situation. China's our number one trading partner. Many Australian jobs rely on trade. Many Australian jobs rely on trade. And that's why the Coalition has put a great emphasis on striking free trade agreements with a whole range of partners, not just China, but expanding further afield. And the two-way trading relationships that were covered by free trade agreements went from 26% when we came to government to over 70% today. But this is a serious issue. We're very much focused on ensuring the markets are there for Australian exporters. And it's worth over $200 billion a year to our economy as a two-way trading relationship. And so we'll continue to seek the best outcomes for our exporters. Now, of course, we would like to do that bilaterally, Chris. We would like to sit down and have that mutually beneficial and respectful dialogue. But in the absence of that, we obviously have options to use multilateral forums.
Just after Chris's question,
Yeah.
are you concerned that the long-term impact on trade, which is more likely because of the shutdown around the world, will detract more from your economic rebound than, say, one or two more nice figures on consumption growth coming back?
Well, as you know, consumption is 60% of GDP. So consumption is absolutely key. Consumption is the largest contributor to GDP, 4 percentage points today, whereas the detraction from net exports was 1.9%. But trade is absolutely critical for Australia. Of 25 million people, we look to be trading with the larger populations in our neighbourhood and beyond. And we've been very successful at that. And we have great produce, and we have great services, and we have great resource sectors. And I'm very optimistic about the opportunities for our exporters around the world. But that being said, the situation with China is very serious. Thank you.